General Hospital spoilers tease that Jason Morgan is about to uncover a horrifying truth: the man everyone believes to be Drew Kane is, in fact, someone else entirely. A masked imposter. A ghost from the past. And the consequences of this revelation will ripple across Port Charles like an earthquake, shattering lives and dragging secrets into the light. The rain fell in a steady rhythm against the windows of General Hospital, casting long streaks of water down the glass like tears the sky itself could no longer hold back. Jason Morgan stood in silence on the upper floor, arms crossed over his chest, eyes narrowed as he watched the man who called himself Drew exit the hospital lobby below. There was a stiffness in the man's movements that didn't belong to Drew. A subtle rigidity in his shoulders, a mechanical calculation in the way he turned his head, things most wouldn't notice. But Jason wasn't most. He was a man trained to detect danger in the shadows, to recognize threats even when they wore familiar faces. And the man downstairs? He wore Drew's face, spoke in Drew's voice, even mimicked Drew's old habits. But he wasn't Drew. He couldn't be. Jason had tried to push the thoughts aside for weeks, blaming his unease on residual trauma from the years they'd both lost. Maybe it was just the damage from Peter August's lies, or the scars left from the mind control experiments, or the time Drew had spent missing. But then came the mistakes. The slip-ups. The first had been small. Drew had misremembered a mission they'd both run in Afghanistan. He'd mentioned a name that didn't belong, a detail no one else could have gotten wrong unless they hadn't been there. Jason had stared at him for a moment too long, and Drew had laughed it off, brushing the moment away with a joke. But Jason didn't laugh. And then came the second mistake, one Jason couldn't ignore. Danny had run to hug Uncle Drew at the Courtemain estate, and the man had crouched down, holding the boy awkwardly, stiffly, like someone unfamiliar with children. Drew had practically raised Scout and adored Danny. He would have lifted the boy up and spun him around without hesitation. But this Drew just smiled, a cold, rehearsed expression, and patted Danny's shoulder like a stranger. From that moment, Jason stopped pretending. He watched. He followed. He investigated. And now he stood on the verge of a discovery that would unravel the very fabric of truth in Port Charles. He had already taken a sample, a used coffee cup from Drew's office at Aurora Media, and sent it to a private lab in Switzerland. Today, the results had come in. Jason didn't need to read them again. He had them memorized. DNA inconclusive, does not match Andrew Kane. Sample consistent with one Peter August. His blood had gone cold when he saw the name. Peter. A man they had all believed dead. A man Jason had tried to kill. A man who had escaped justice time and again, weaving webs of deception so intricate they could have fooled anyone. But not him. Not this time. He left the hospital and followed the man, Peter, through the gray streets of Port Charles. Rain soaked through Jason's jacket as he trailed at a distance, his mind replaying every moment over the past year. Every smile Peter had faked. Every manipulation he had set in motion. Including Michael and Willow. It made sickening sense now. Michael and Willow's marriage had been slowly crumbling for months. Jason had attributed it to grief, to the pressures of running ELQ, to Willow's health scare last spring. But now, the puzzle pieces began to click into place. Drew, or rather, Peter, had inserted himself into their lives under the guise of support. He had comforted Willow. Whispered doubt into her ear. Jason remembered the way Drew had lingered a little too long by Willow's side at Leo's birthday party. The way he'd deflected questions about Michael's late nights at the office. All of it now felt sinister, deliberate, and calculated. Peter hadn't just stolen Drew's identity. He was using it as a weapon. A weapon to destroy the people who had once destroyed him. Jason's jaw clenched as he watched Peter step into the metro court, the automatic doors closing behind him. Jason followed moments later, dripping rain onto the polished tile floor. He didn't care. Carly had once told him that revenge was like poison, it eats away at you slowly. But this wasn't revenge. This was justice. He didn't approach. Not yet. Not here, where too many eyes could see. Instead, he observed from the bar as Peter took a seat with Willow in a corner booth, his voice soft, his touch gentle as he handed her a glass of wine. She smiled weakly, clearly drained. Her eyes were puffy, red, she'd been crying. Jason wanted to storm across the room and rip the mask off Peter's face. But he didn't. He waited. He listened. And when the moment was right, he would strike. 3 days later, the trap was set. Jason didn't work alone. He knew he'd need backup, people who could act without emotion, who could be trusted to hold the line if things went sideways. Anna Devane was the first person he called. When she heard the name Peter, her silence on the phone was chilling. "I watched him die," she whispered. "You watched a body burn," Jason replied coldly. "He was always 2 steps ahead, Anna. You know that better than anyone." She agreed to meet him that night at a safe house on the outskirts of town. Dante Falconeri joined them shortly after, his face pale when he saw the lab results Jason spread across the table. "No wonder nothing about Drew felt right," Dante muttered. "I thought I was just paranoid." "He killed the real Drew," Jason said flatly. "Took his face. His name. His life." Anna paled. "If he's truly alive, we need to take him down cleanly. We need proof. Something so solid that even Peter can't wriggle his way out of it." Jason nodded. "I've got a plan." They coordinated every detail. Surveillance was placed on Peter's apartment. Britt Westbourne, who had recently returned to town under mysterious circumstances and now ran a new medical research foundation, was added to the watch list. Jason wasn't ready to confront her yet, not until he understood her connection to Peter. But something didn't add up. Why had Britt returned? Why now? The answer came sooner than expected. Late one evening, Jason intercepted a shipment addressed to Britt's foundation. Inside the unmarked crate were hard drives, encrypted, high-level hardware from a private server company in Belarus. Jason cracked one open. Inside were files, medical records, payment logs, falsified documents. And one contract. Signed by Andreas K. Freeman. A known alias for Peter August. Jason stared at the signature for a long time. Britt was either working for Peter or being manipulated by him. Either way, the noose was tightening. He confronted her 2 nights later. Britt stood behind her desk at the Foundation's headquarters, dressed in a sleek black pantsuit. Her expression guarded the moment she saw him walk in. "Jason," she said cautiously, "this is a surprise." "We need to talk," he said, voice low. "About Drew. And about your real boss." She blinked. "My boss?" "Peter." Britt's hands twitched, but she said nothing. Jason stepped forward. "You knew. Maybe not from the beginning, but you know now. He's alive. He's pretending to be Drew. And he's the one funding this place." Britt swallowed hard. Her facade cracked for just a moment. "I didn't know, at first. I thought the foundation was clean. I was told the investor wanted to remain anonymous. Then strange things started happening. I got instructions to manipulate patient files. Change test results." She looked away. "He threatened me. Said he'd expose everything. My past, my family, Liesel. I didn't know what to do." Jason's voice softened. "You know now. And you can help me stop him." She nodded slowly. "What do you need?" she asked. Jason's eyes darkened. "A confession. Peter August's darkest secret is finally exposed, and Jason Morgan is ready to do whatever it takes to bring him down, even if it means risking everything." Rain lashed against the windows of Britt's office, the storm outside nothing compared to the chaos that had just unfolded inside. The chair Peter had sat in was still spinning slightly, abandoned only moments before. Britt stood motionless, trembling, her fingers still curled around the tiny recording device Jason had slipped into her palm that morning. Her heart pounded so loudly it drowned out the ticking of the clock on the wall. She had done it. She had gotten him to confess. And then she'd almost died for it. Jason burst through the door less than 3 minutes later, gun drawn, eyes scanning every corner of the room. But Peter was already gone, like a shadow slipping through a crack in the wall. Jason holstered his weapon and crossed the room in 3 strides, catching Britt just as she swayed on her feet. He held her steady, his voice low, and even as he asked if she was hurt. She shook her head. Not physically. But something inside her had cracked. Peter had been in her space, in her life, under her skin for months, and she had let him. Jason listened to the recording again, not because he needed to, but because hearing Peter's voice admitting the truth, that he had murdered Drew Kane in cold blood, that he had stolen his identity, and that he was now targeting Michael, Willow, even Wiley, fed the fire in Jason's chest. This wasn't about vengeance. This was about ending it. For good. He left Britt with Anna and Dante, who were already en route, and headed straight to the Metro Court. He knew Peter's patterns. Knew his mind. And he knew exactly where the bastard would go next. At that very moment, Willow stood in the quiet of her home, staring at the photograph of her wedding day. She had held onto the frame for nearly an hour now, unable to put it down. Her heart ached with confusion, betrayal, and something even more painful, doubt. Michael hadn't been himself lately. She had chalked it up to stress, but then Drew, her supposed friend, had started pointing out little things. Missed calls. Unexplained meetings. Late nights at the office. And the worst part? Part of her had believed him. Part of her still did. So when the knock came at the door, and she saw Drew's face on the other side, her breath caught. He looked soaked from the rain, a faint cut on his cheek, but his expression was soft. Concerned. Safe. She let him in. He stepped inside slowly, his voice low, intimate, almost reverent. He said he was worried. That she'd seemed distant. That he just wanted to talk. Willow offered him tea, but he declined. He didn't want anything but her attention. The conversation started innocently enough. He talked about grief. About losing identity. About how hard it was to love someone who was drifting away. He said he knew what it felt like to love someone who couldn't love you back. His hand brushed hers. She didn't move. Not right away. But something inside her hesitated. It was his eyes. Drew's eyes had always been kind, even when tired. But the man in front of her, his eyes were cold. Focused. Predatory. She pulled her hand away. He tilted his head and asked what was wrong. She said she didn't know. That's when Jason burst through the door. He didn't knock. He didn't wait. He slammed it open with a force that startled them both, and in that moment, the mask slipped. The expression on Peter's face twisted, just for a second, into something Willow had never seen before. Rage. Fear. And then, a smile. Well, Peter said, standing, I suppose this is where the charade ends. Jason leveled the gun at him, eyes like ice. Don't move. Willow backed away slowly, her breath shaking. Jason, what's going on? That's not Drew, Jason said. It's Peter August. Willow blinked. What? He killed Drew. Months ago. He took his face. His name. He's been using it to manipulate you. To hurt Michael. To destroy everything Drew ever stood for. Peter laughed softly. Don't listen to him, Willow. He's jealous. He's always been jealous. But Willow was already moving toward Jason, eyes wide with horror. Peter dropped the act. He lunged. Jason fired once, grazing his shoulder, but Peter was fast. He crashed through the sliding glass door that led to the backyard, disappearing into the storm. Jason shouted for Willow to stay back and followed, sprinting into the night. The rain turned everything to chaos. Mud splashed up Jason's legs as he ran, chasing the dark blur through trees and shrubs and across the wet grass behind the Quartermain estate. Lightning split the sky, casting Peter's figure in brief, blinding light. Jason tackled him near the shed, both of them crashing into the mud, fists flying. "You killed him," Jason growled, punching Peter hard across the jaw. "You took everything from him." Peter coughed blood but smiled. "I became him. Better than he ever was." Jason slammed his fist into Peter's face again and again, until Anna and Dante arrived, dragging him off. Peter lay on the ground, bloodied but conscious, laughing through broken teeth. "You can't stop me," he hissed. "You'll never stop me." Anna knelt beside him, gun drawn. "Oh, I think we just did." It took hours to clean up the scene. Peter was taken into custody, heavily guarded, and transferred to a secure facility under WSB jurisdiction. The news hit Port Charles like an explosion. Britt held a press conference, publicly severing all ties to the foundation Peter had built in secret. She admitted she had been deceived, but also took responsibility for not seeing it sooner. Michael arrived at the hospital later that night, his face pale as he listened to Jason recount everything. The manipulation. The lies. The threat to Wiley. Willow sat beside him, tears rolling down her face. She kept apologizing, but Michael just held her hand. They weren't okay. Not yet. But they were alive. And they had been spared something much worse. Jason didn't sleep. Not for days. Even after Peter was locked away, something inside him refused to settle. He visited Drew's old apartment alone, standing in the silence for what felt like hours. There were still photos on the wall. Books on the shelf. A jacket on the hook near the door. Everything that made Drew who he was, everything Peter had tried to steal, was still here. Untouched. Jason placed a single photograph on the table. It was of him and Drew. The real Drew. He whispered a quiet promise before walking out into the night. Peter might have worn his brother's face, but he would never own his soul.